So today our session is about the role of Server 2022 and delivering scalable desktops. I think we've got a mix of people with us today, ranging from people who are internal IT to IT directors, but hopefully we've pitched it in such a way that you can go in and it gives you some understanding of what the topic is. Not further to do then. We'll leave questions and answers to the end, but if anybody does have anything burning, by all means use the reaction buttons and we can deal with it there and then. At the moment it's a reasonably small group, so I think we can hopefully have a good session. So a little bit about us. So I'm Jamie Watson, Managing Director of Fusion IT. Been in IT for something like 25 years now. Started life as an engineer. Pretty much working in the likes of Novell, Microsoft NT4, moving a bit more into sort of networking and Cisco and Checkpoint and Lotus Notes and all sorts of things really. Bringing me to current day, Managing Director of Fusion IT, a firm that's 40 plus staff, and two sides of the business, the support side of the business and the development side of the business. And over to James.
Yeah, so good morning, guys. Thanks for joining us. I'm James, newly appointed CTO at Fusion. So my background is been in IT for over a decade now. Started out as an on-site engineer, and then worked my way up to becoming CTO. Similar to Jamie, working in different technology stacks, but primarily around the platform and virtualization environments.
Yeah, unfortunately, virtualization wasn't around 25 years ago, so I had to go around putting floppy disks in things and some things that I remind sort of our engineers on a daily basis. So again, this is not about a sort of a pitch about us, but a little bit about Fusion. We're honest, hardworking, ISO accredited. We provide IT services since 2003. We're based in Brickhouse. We've got over 40 staff, the majority technical. We're skilled and certified in market leader technologies and ISO accredited. We're services focused and very much sort of tailoring any sort of client contract to them. It's not one case fits all. We very much sort of look at the client, what they need, whether that's us managing their in-house IT or as a third line stopgap. We very much got everything really. We are a bit unique in that we've got an in-house development team that pretty much works in legal case management. There is a few sort of spin-offs from that, but C# developers, DBAs, BAs, that sort of thing. We've got an ongoing technical and personal development procedures in place for all our staff. So we make sure that we look after people. Again, a quick slide just on who we work with. Just a snapshot there of the sort of partners that we have and the arenas that we play in. So why we're here today. Ultimately, it's to sort of talk about our journey through the ages, and I guess we're interested in this topic because it's our business. We've got to make sure that we keep ahead of the game, ahead of the curve in terms of things that throw at us. As I mentioned, I've been in the game a long time, and what we were doing 5 years ago, let alone 25 years ago, is completely different to what we're going to be doing in another 5 years. And we've sort of been following this topic quite closely, and we believe that that we're on the sort of the bandwagon that we need to go with. Ultimately, we feel that Microsoft, as they do over the years, they sort of drag us along, and eventually you then realise that, it's not been a bad journey, and they've probably got something right. We were only talking this morning about probably 20 odd years ago. Maybe 20 years ago, things like hosted exchange sort of came online, and there's companies that were doing hosted exchange, and then eventually Microsoft 365 came out, and we were a bit like, this might work, and zoom on to current day, and I think if you've got an on-premise exchange box, you're probably in the minority nowadays. So I think the crux of it is that Microsoft do tend to know what they're doing, and the net result is often a good result. We've got lots of firms that we support using the systems that integrate into Office, and RDS Citrix to deploy a desktop. So, if these things are going to sort of start to look sort of end of life-ish, we need to have some, because people's requirements are not going to change so much. We need to have some solutions really. We're sort of interested in where you guys are with your journey. So, at the end, if people are sort of willing to share it with us, we're really interested in sort of, if you've done any investigation as to how you might sort of get around some of this, or maybe you've had another take on it really. We want to hear your pain points. So, if there's anything that you currently got that is, a pain point, there's something that we can help with. We just want you to go away and have a better understanding of Microsoft and how they see the future really. So whilst the format of this session is reasonably technical, we're going to be talking at a reasonable technical level. I'm hoping it's sort of going to appeal to, more of an IT director, somebody who's got to give some vision to the business. So we'll see how we get on. Okay, so what do we do currently? Well, for certainly the past 5 or 10 years, the majority of as sort of in terms of delivery of desktop has very much looked like this, which is remote desktop with or without Citrix, which is scalable. You can extend those machines and add more as and when you want. It gives you some patching and maintenance concerns because you've got multiple users accessing those machines at the same time. And one user can impact the entire to guest, which can be an issue, and also Teams support. I think we've certainly seen since the start of the pandemic and the increase in Teams usage that that Microsoft have very little incentive or want to actually allow full Teams support within an RDS environment. It does get a little bit better if you implement things like Citrix, but again, it's never going to be perfect because of the environment that it's in. Another way to so all these two ways really support a way of remote working quite well. So Windows sort of 10, Windows 11 if you want VDI. So again, this is a way of bringing up a Windows 10 machine remotely and virtually, and allowing your end users to consume a desktop in that way. Again, it's good from an engineering perspective because it allows you to do offline patching and the ability to release gold images to clients, and also clients have differing images, if that makes sense. It has good team support, or it has recently with a plugin, and but it can be quite expensive from a deployment perspective. And then I guess sort of the old full fat desktop, which is effectively people using their workstations locally and talking to a server, which is fine, and it utilizes local processing power, which we're all getting on new machines nowadays, but it does have a high management cost and support cost, and it doesn't really easily support hybrid working without the need of VPNs, and even then you probably have issues in terms of delivering certain applications over that. So moving on to the next slide, which is for James.
Yeah, so I think, as part of all of this, the current facts that we see and that Microsoft are kind of deploying and showcasing in the support and compatibility matrix is that essentially Server 22 will not support Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise. So they are just outright denying the ability to run it on that server environment, which throws into question what do we do from a remote desktop session host environment. You can install Office apps for enterprise on Server 2022 and it does work. We have tested that, but if you run into any issues and have to log any Microsoft support cases, they will outright refuse to support that. As you can see in the current facts, so the Server 2019 and 2022 will stop supporting long-term service channel, which some of you may know as Office 2021 Professional Plus, and that's going to be kind of out of support from October 2026, and Office 2019 will be October 2025. Server 2019 will stop supporting 365 apps for enterprise in October 2025, and Server 2012, 2012 R2 has already stopped support. So from this and conversations that we've been having with partners and Microsoft itself, they've advised that all the application will not stop working. It will be the connectivity to Office 365 that will be either classed as ceased or out of support. So many of you will know that they've made previous threats about this before from operating systems from Windows 7 and Windows 10 if you were on an old build, so pre-20H2, and they are also classed as out of support connection. So this also includes support for Office 365 for Office versioning 2. So Office 2013 was apparently out of support of connection in October 2020. Office 2016 has until October next year. Office 2019 has till October next year, and long-term service channel is out of support in 2026. So as Jamie's just put on screen there, that's the Office support matrix. Some of you may have seen this before. It is doing the rounds at the moment on LinkedIn and places like that. But you can see there that on Server 2022, it's just not applicable for Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise. And as we can see, Windows 11 has no end date, whereas the previous operating systems do.
It's interesting actually that that we've seen a trend for that, and I'm sure other people have experienced this, that Microsoft are actively discouraging any form of perpetual license. So if we go back to certain clients over the years, sometimes we would probably buy them volume licenses, which would give them usage of that license for that version forevermore, if that makes sense. Some clients may take out software assurance on there, and which they pay per year and get the upgrades. But we're really sort of with the demise of volume licensing, which has been sort of replaced with there's some CSP licensing that's available. That's a very similar sort of concept. But Microsoft will say they're trying to simplify the licensing platform, but I think it's all quite clear to see that they want people to move to more of a consumption of these licenses. And I think with my sort of IT manager's hat on, historically it was fine because you rarely sort of upgraded the version of Office maybe every three or 4 years or something like that if you were lucky, and you got your return on investment. But I think as applications are actually moving to more of a sort of a cloudy and a far more increased cycle of updates, I think people want to be sort of on the more recent versions. So the act of actually paying for a subscription to a service and buying it as a service rather than buying I joke, and I thought about the other day that there was in the days as an engineer having to go to PC World and literally pick up a copy of Office 1997, and that doesn't happen nowadays. So it's a trend, and effectively, unless you throw you rattle out of the cot, that we've got to get on board with it and hopefully embrace it really. Slide.
So yeah, this is kind of current food for thought really. So any licensing spend on remote desktop services or virtual desktop infrastructure that requires Office support and further return on investment after October 2025, which is 40 months away, needs to be evaluated pretty soon. If, like us, clients are in a rolling 3-5 year server cycle refresh, which we're now approaching that time where we need to be making decisions, especially with the defined end date that Microsoft are imposing, and what that kind of does to the landscape of server OSs or virtual desktop environments that we put out. So the possible use of supplier licensing as a stopgap or CSP licensing. So some of you may be aware of the supplier licensing model, which is a service provider level licensing, which could be the good way forward, and it will allow monthly rolling declarations to Microsoft that could be agreed internally or with the client about the end of Server 2022 Office. Gives a bit more breathing space to everybody to kind of get the ducks in a row over the next 12 months to see what options they want to explore. There's also looking at the alternative ways to deploy applications. So depending on the applications required, there's obviously software as a service from providers, vendors. but that's not going to happen overnight. People are working on them, and more software as a service are being released, but not everything's going that way. And often suppliers try to package the cloud as RDS or Citrix shortcuts, which some of you may be aware of, that you speak to some of these software vendors, they'll just provide a shortcut to their hosted environment. So probably need to start asking vendors how they plan to ensure that their product will be supported and what kind of integrations into Office they will support, or how they're going to remedy this going forward. And finally, ensuring that budgets are available before it's too late. Budgets need to be allocated, as with anything that's been released or in its early release, there are now always cost considerations. Gone are the days of buying tin and server OS and Windows CALs, as Jamie mentioned from PC World. But now more than ever, we need to be making sure that these additional licenses or software costs are factored into the next year's budget.
So, I'm sorry, James, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. So what are the solutions? So we've kind of pinpointed a few solutions down here, and just to kind of highlight where we think the model's going to go, really. So the options are really move all line of businesses and applications to a software as a service model. And we believe that's highly unrealistic. Not all applications are going to have the capability of being delivered in this manner, and we don't think that's going to be an overnight thing for all vendors. But with this push from Microsoft, it might change in the next 3 years, and more SaaS models will become apparent. Run the gauntlet. It sounds crazy, but there is always the option to just kind of wait and see. See if Microsoft will make a U-turn because of the demand of having remote desktop session hosts requirements. We'd like to think that they do that, but I don't see it happening anytime soon. Or you could just go for it and install the apps for Enterprise on Server 2022 and just run the risk that hopefully you'll never need Microsoft support. And when the date hits, just see what happens. And we definitely not recommend this model, but it is something that some businesses out there will do. We've also got the option of moving all services to Azure and decommissioning anything on premise. Now that is available today. And what that means is there's different variations of Azure. You can run RDS session hosts, Azure Virtual Desktop, or hosted software as a service devices yourself. So just going back to Azure Virtual Desktop. So not everyone's probably heard of this term, but Azure Virtual Desktop is a multi-session Windows 10 box that runs in Azure that you can connect to. That's came out in early release in 2019, I believe. Was it, Jamie? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Was it? Yeah.
Been GA since 2019, I think it was.
Yeah.
It was probably in. Yeah.
Yeah. So where we see this is that Azure Virtual Desktop's now being used by quite a lot of organizations, and Azure hosted services itself are used by hundreds and thousands of people per day. It's stable and updated every month, especially Azure Virtual Desktop Stack. And it's got the ability to reduce pricing based on commitment. Say 3 years, I think it's around 70% discount they're offering nowadays, which is quite a considerable chunk and goes from the CapEx to the OpEx model. We've also got no support for latency sensitive applications, the multimedia redirection for Azure Virtual Desktop, which is something that is in early preview, which is one of the features of AVD Stack. And there's also the per user access pricing for external users, which is something that we discovered a few weeks ago, which you pay for your core user license count, but any external ad hoc users that need access to the virtual environment are paid on a monthly cost and uses the declaration with integration between Azure Active Directory.
I think just one of the points to reiterate there is around the things like that, the multimedia redirection stuff. He's only getting. They could technically, I think, engineer it and put it into RDS in the way I look at it, but nothing is getting put into in terms of, you look at the feature lists of RDS in Server 2022 and it's virtually not moved. It's almost like they've not got anybody working on it internally. So it just paints a picture.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree with you, Jamie. I think that's where we've kind of seen it, that Azure Virtual Desktop seems to be at the forefront of Microsoft's roadmap nowadays, and it looks to be where they're focusing all their efforts. We noticed, again, as most people did during the pandemic, where Microsoft Teams became available to all people working from home, that there were issues on remote desktop, but they never put in anything into the pipeline to remedy the issues that people were facing. So I think, Jamie, thinking back, we have had some experience on looking at the Azure and Azure Virtual Desktop.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, there's been clients over the last probably 2 and a bit years. Certainly one a couple of years ago that a 500 user firm, was at the point of looking at, do we put things on premise? Do you move things to Fusion Private Cloud? Do we put it into Azure? And we certainly did I mean, at the time, well, as it was called, Windows Virtual Desktop back then, was in preview, and it was very much using some of the same technologies that they were starting to implement things like FS Logics and other technology stacks within that environment, and it all looked quite exciting and a good way to develop and a good way to deliver a desktop. But I think at the time, it really involved investing completely into Azure. And if I'm honest, for that particular client, going back then, the cost was an issue. I think going back, it was something like 50% more expensive over delivering what was effectively an on-premise private cloud solution for them at the time. Arguably, probably not as redundant in terms of connectivity and storage and that sort of thing, but essentially delivering the same experience to the end user. So we've evaluated and kept an eye on costs, and I think, as James sort of alluded to, those costs are probably shrinking a little bit, and it might be getting to a point where people can probably potentially bite the bullet, and certain user cases where a pure Azure Virtual Desktop with all services hosted in Azure is a really good solution.
Cool, thanks for that, Jenna. So one of the other options that we're exploring our potential solutions at the moment is Microsoft Azure Stack, which is hyperconverged infrastructure, which we'll cover in a later slide, and also the potential of Azure on VMware. Finally, we continue as is, but we start to run and consume more Windows 10, Windows 11 VDI. The downside of that difference from Azure Virtual Desktop is that VDI is one user per VM and doesn't allow for multi-sessions. So it can become quite costly quite quickly.
Cool. I like, with my IT manager's hat on, shall we say, I like the idea of that, James. I like the idea of, the tin being somebody else's responsibility, it all being Azure, in Azure, it's all Microsoft stack. But if I'm honest, I like my data centers. The business relies and has contracts in place with customers and suppliers and vendors that we've signed contracts and terms and conditions to make sure that we hold our own data, that it's under certain terms and even in physical locations. I don't think I want to make my technical architects redundant. These guys have worked with me for years, and they're good guys and they know what they're doing. So let's just say I'm an IT director of 1,000 user plus law firm, and I don't want to put everything into Azure. What have you got a solution for me?
Yeah, so I think the solution that I've just mentioned is Microsoft Azure Stack hyperconverged infrastructure. So this isn't a new terminology. This has been going around for a while and is being provided by multiple different vendors. But hyperconverged infrastructure is a term, that some people have had experience in already, and it's essentially using your own tin from verified providers such as Dell, HP, and ensuring the device is compatible with Azure Stack HCI. This mainly references the use of S2D storage, which is Microsoft. It got introduced in Server 2016, which allows for a device to have onboard storage, which creates a storage pool across your HCI hosts. You can then use Windows Admin Center alongside some PowerShell scripts to install and configure the HCI stack role and present a failover cluster, which isn't too dissimilar from Hyper-V, which pretty much all firms out there that aren't using VMware are still utilizing. And what that means for you, Jamie, is that you can use your own tin, but it ties into Azure and allows for the presentation of Azure Virtual Desktop, which can be installed locally or in the cloud or fully on-prem. You know, there's the hybrid solution that you could look at as well. You could have it running on your own tin or both. You could have a mixed environment, or you can run it fully in the cloud. And I think that's the kind of things that you're looking for.
Cool. Well, hopefully I'll give you some questions on what I want to do now is just sort of again just give you some sort of questions about about what it might look like. So that in my head now we've got sort of a number of solutions, but the main ones I think are we either move everything purely into Azure and host everything in Azure, or we look at this hybrid, this HCI and or obviously farm it off to another MSP or firm like Fusion that can do all this for us. But in reality, if I want to maintain that myself, so from a pure Azure perspective, tell me what if I move everything, what's my data centers going to look like? What's my comms rooms going to look like?
Yeah, so if you move everything to pure Azure, your comms rooms are going to be fairly quiet, and the requirement of data centers aren't going to be needed anymore. You'll have a few switches and routers, and maybe the odd archive server on-prem, but your actual spinning tin and storage devices would no longer be required.
Okay, cool. So, what in terms of moving those systems? Let's just take a typical couple of hundred user law firm. Maybe I've got 20 servers, a SQL server, an on-premise SharePoint server that's legacy. Is it going to be easy to move that in?
I mean, there's different ways that you can integrate into Azure. I think the main consideration that you need to be aware of is that it's going to be time consuming, no matter which way you decide to do it. Migrating the services obviously comes with additional costs. There's egress and ingress and bandwidth costings and virtual network tunnels and virtual fastpass, plus the price of the storage and compute to actually get your virtual machines onto a blob storage in Azure. But you can either migrate, clone the devices, or just start fresh.
Mm-hmm. So and it sounds like it needs to be given some thought and some real project management and and looking at coexistence and that sort of thing whilst you're doing it. Cool. And then how would I find out those costs? It sounds like there's a lot of moving parts there, and
yeah, so the costs are obviously, you can look at the calculators that Azure offer. You basically pipe in all the information that you have around CPU, memory, storage counts, performance tiers of your storage. You're still underlying with the cost of your licensing.
Cool.
There's also the use of express routes or Azure FastPath, but that comes with a price tag, and it depends on if your ISP actually offers that solution.
Okay. And I'm assuming, because I'm putting let's just say historically we've had a little bit of fat clients going on, and and I'm assuming that we're going to need to either upgrade infrastructure links if we want to continue those those fat clients to continue, and there's going to be some investment certainly in connectivity to make that happen.
There is, yeah. That is the problem. All these costs are kind of somewhat a finger in the air. You can do calculations to kind of get a gauge as to what your prices are going to be, but until you start piping data into Azure and how much inbound and outbound traffic you're using, the costs can quickly run away with you.
Yeah, and with my Fusion hat on, I guess we do have experience with building solutions around Azure and have use cases. So therefore, if anybody does want a hand with that, we can assist. Cool. So moving on to this HCI solution, I guess this really appeals to me because it sounds like I'm getting the best of both worlds. So but let's just say well, it doesn't to some degree, whether it's it's Fusion in our private cloud, delivering this as a service, or this is the IT director of a large law firm that's wanting to do it in house. What bits of kit do I need or need to buy or convert to make this happen?
So after talking to some of our partners and the storage vendors, your kit, especially for Fusion's point of view, may already be compatible. So this just depends on what kind of onboard storage you have in the host devices that you're running, say, your VMware or your Hyper-V environments on. But the actual hosts themselves, it doesn't use any particular RAID controllers. It's basically just a bunch of disks that you can configure into a pool. Or there's the option of main vendors. So again, Dell, HP, they are now offering their own defined host devices that are HCI ready.
And what about the storage providers? If we spent quite a lot on SANs and storage, I'm assuming they're going to be still sort of compatible from a host perspective.
Yeah, from a host perspective, you have to speak to each vendor to ensure that the iSCSI connections can present to your host device. But yes, you can still utilize your normal SAN devices.
Okay, and we've recently just upgraded to VMware. Is that something I'm going to be able to reuse?
Yeah, so the VMware piece is still a bit of an unknown. You could use a hybrid function of running your core servers on your VMware environment and move your virtual desktops onto hyper-converged infrastructure or full Azure. There are new technologies that are coming out every day that are incorporating these pieces, which I'll touch on in the next step. But as it stands, there's no defined utilization of VMware.
Cool. Okay. So one of the things that I'm very keen on as we build our private cloud, as we build things for clients as well, is that that we have redundancy in there. And I mean, what happens if we lose a HCI node that's on-prem?
Yeah, so similar to how you kind of run your Hyper-V high availability or VMware hyperability, HCI utilizes failover cluster manager. So depending on how many nodes you have, HCI failover cluster manager will kick in. There's also the multipath to the storage that you can define, and depending on where you configure your backups, you can also replicate and back up these environments to Azure. So you could have your HCI node running on-prem, but you also have a storage pool in Azure that replicates that data between. So if anything ever happened to your on-premise site, you could then restore. Obviously, that comes with extra costs because you are still using a storage pool in Azure, but that is a worst case scenario.
All right. So technically, by having a backup resource within Azure that's of my on-prem kit, I'm already baking in effectively a DR site into our environment.
You are, yeah. It gives you that option for disaster recovery and business continuity plans, which hot topics with everybody, especially with the way the world's going at the moment. But yeah, effectively, if you get that configured, you are always on.
Excellent. And in terms of the Microsoft 365, is there any special licensing that I need to support this, or?
Yeah, so most 365 licensing models that are available now. So you've got the 365 E3, E5, student use benefits, and also Microsoft 365 Business Premium. These all come with Azure Virtual Desktop kind of baked into the license. You can then also use the Windows 10 Enterprise E3, E5, Education, and VDA Power User. All these are available either through 365 licensing, your partner, and also CSP.
Excellent. I actually, I mean, the Microsoft 365 Business Premium sort of does appeal to me as a, yeah, we're a sub 300 user law firm, and I believe the pricing on that's quite reasonable and will work with a sub 300 users. So excellent. Yeah, can I use HCI just purely to deliver desktops? Because this is what we're talking about, isn't it? At the moment, it's the reason why we're having a lot of these conversations is because we feel as though if we're going to need to continue to use that Office desktop environment, that we're going to need to look at alternative ways to provide that desktop environment for Office. So I'm thinking, can we leave can we just use HCI for that and leave all our existing servers in place?
In simple terms, yes, you can. That is the main thing that is pushing every vendor forward now, is the ability to run just pure Azure Virtual Desktop on your own HCI. As long as it's tied into the HCI stack and Azure, there's nothing stopping you from having all your existing in place and just running them on this Azure hybrid.
Okay, excellent. And what about I want to just move the desktop experience into Azure and leave all existing in place in say our data center? Is that something that's possible?
Again, yep, fully compatible. We'd look to using express routes to allow better communication between Azure and your on-prem equipment. But yes, you can run your full virtual desktop environment in Azure and leave all your own environment from it, whether it be in VMware, Hyper-V, full-blown server environments, if people are still using that. But yeah, you can run both those.
Excellent, sounds good. And I guess in terms of if we went down that sort of hybrid route and we've got some on-prem boxes and some AVD, how will it look from a networking perspective? Am I going to be routing back out to Azure to come back in again, or how does it work?
Yeah, it depends which way you configure it. There's obviously the express routes that I've just mentioned, which kind of ties you into a virtual network tunnel between your two devices, or you can, as you say, go out and back in. It just depends on which way you want to run it, really. Some people like the separation between Azure and your on-prem, and just having a secure tunnel between, or you can merge them into this hyper-converged environment, and that'll use the private network tunnel.
Excellent. And my engineers have sort of been used to managing servers, VMware, and what would it look like for them on a day-to-day basis if they were sort of in this hybrid environment?
Yeah, so from the hybrid environment, as long as they have experience with Azure, then it's the same interface. There's the added extra that you can use Windows Admin Center for managing your local HCI clusters. So as part of the building out of the resource pools and actual virtual desktop environment, you have to do some configuration on the Windows Admin Center, and then you tie that back into Azure. But as long as they have that experience, the interface is the same.
Excellent. So I'm prepared to bite the bullet in public preview. What do I potentially need?
So as I mentioned at the beginning of all this, you need a bit of time, a bit of experience, and just the right kit. You may already have the kit available. Us at Fusion, we're quite fortunate that some of our Dell PowerEdge devices are compatible with HCI. So we have the ability to run that proof of concept. Now, depending on what kit you have, you can speak to your storage vendor or your host vendor and just ask the question. But the main thing is an Azure license, so an Azure subscription, so that you can actually tie this in, and just access to the articles available online that we can point you in the right direction if people want to take a look.
Excellent. And I'm assuming our professional services team are going to be well on board, and already are to some degree to be able to assist, with anybody who wants to either have this built from scratch or assistance building with a bit of backup. We're there really.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. You mentioned there a bit about the price. What is the pricing for this and how does it work?
Yeah, so the pricing, as it kind of states in the slide, with Azure Stack HCI to incorporate it into the Azure cluster, Microsoft do charge a premium of £8 per physical core per month. So depending on what host devices you are using, if you've got single core, 2 core, 4 core, they will charge you £8 per core per month. Plus you obviously then have the Microsoft plan, which I mentioned above with the 365 licensing costs, or you could look to bring in your own license. So HCI is effectively a core edition of server. So you could utilize that licensing for your HCI as well as your other virtual machines.
Excellent. I'm guessing that that it sounds like to me that if you're going to go down this route, you've got to make sure that your servers are of a reasonable. There's no point putting 5-year-old servers that have got old processors that are not as good as recent ones. So to make the most of it, really.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's the case with most things. You always want to be running your production environment on the latest kit, which, if you're looking at doing this or you've recently procured hardware, then definitely want to make sure that it's the most up to date.
Excellent. I mean, it sounds like there's nothing other than the fact that it's in public preview, and I probably wouldn't want to do it till it goes GA. There's nothing stopped me from doing this today, and even bringing on RDS boxes as part of it, and even other servers, and running that within HCI as well.
Yeah, definitely. There's nothing stopping you. It's just having the time and the resources available to actually sit down and go through it methodically. It's not as straightforward as chucking in an ISO and clicking next. There is a bit more to it. So,
which is where your trusted partners will come into these things, I guess. Excellent.
So I think for us, kind of what Fusion are doing as their kind of next steps is that, as I mentioned earlier, there's the VMware aspect of things. So Microsoft are currently offering 2 different things. They're offering Azure Arc for VMware, which is still very primitive and in public preview, but it does allow for the connectivity of your VMware vSphere appliance into Azure. Now, what that means is it gives you a holistic management console all in one place. So if you are utilizing Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure or if HCI and you still have a VMware environment, it gives your engineers, management team, just one holistic portal so that you can manage everything. So that's from restarting servers, changing device configs, all in one place rather than multiple different portals. And the next thing we're going to start looking at is VMware Horizon. Now, Horizon is not new by any means and is very similar to Citrix, but they have recently announced that the addition of Azure Virtual Desktop is what's caught our attention. So we're going to explore how VMware Horizon integrates into Azure to see how this differs from hyperconverged infrastructure using the HCI Stack operating system, and what it'd allow us to do on your current VMware platform rather than having to rebuild. We also want to look at what that means from a licensing and cost point of view. So VMware Horizon has its own licensing cost and then the associated cost with AVD and Azure, just to see what that kind of looked like that we could potentially offer to clients.
And I think that's again one of my key takeaways here is when I'm talking to clients about this and is that all this needs to be factored in, and if they're on a current refresh as it stands now, you don't really want to be investing in some of these potentially redundant technologies that or something that might not have the longevity that something else will really. So whilst it does seem 2026 as a sort of a bit of a deadline seems a long time away. It will come around fast, and in the world of IT and refresh cycles, it's not that long at all really. So and I think it's where sort of clients that we're talking to imminently and now regarding our private cloud and moving to our private cloud, we're having to be quite honest about that and sort of say, well, these are the constraints that's getting put on on us at this moment in time, and we can't in good justice sort of sell a Fusion private cloud remote desktop solution, running server 2019 with Office on it, etc., which technically we could do tomorrow and deliver tomorrow. That's fine, but that client will be expecting to get at least 3, if not 4 years of ROI on that, and it's pushing it really, to be fair, if they sign tomorrow. So I think that's where we're at, and it just seems some of these things are sort of very early doors, but other than the fact that Azure Virtual Desktop is early doors in terms of the on-premise element of it, the HCI. It's been around for a long time, and there's lots of people using it. But we just got to give clients and work with people to give them the options that they want in terms of looking at the cost of that, and it does need to be thought about. For something that's going to happen in 2 or 3 years' time, I'm getting the feeling that the cost might be a little bit more than say the last refresh that the client had, because there's a few more elements going into it, and so we just need to have those conversations really.